Welcome everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 10th of August, 2022, and this is the Cluster API project meeting. Cluster API is a sub-project of SIG Cluster Lifecycle, and as such, we follow the Kubernetes SIG's community guidelines, which basically means raise your hand if you would like to participate in the meeting. And please treat others as you would expect to be treated. And to be explicit, please be kind to each other. So we have a pretty light agenda today, but let's start things off by giving a chance to welcome some new attendees. So if anyone is new to the community and would like to introduce themselves, please feel free to unmute yourself and say hi. All righty, I am not seeing any unmutes or hands going up. So yeah, we will move on to the next part. So open proposal readouts. Do we have anyone who would like to speak on any of the open proposals that we have currently? Just raise your hand and I'll call in. Yeah, Jonathan, go ahead.
Hey, so just a quick update. The add-on proposal is out of draft and ready for review. So if you have some time, please take a look. I'd really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, feel free to ping me on Slack.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Do we have any other project or any updates on the open proposals? All right, I am not seeing any hands going up, so let us move on. So discussion topics. It looks like we've got a couple added here. So first up is Jack. Why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Thanks, Mike. So I just wanted to announce that I will be annoying the right folks about getting a patch release of CAPI release to include this bug. Thanks for clicking through, Mike. So this affects multiple machine pool scenarios for CAPZ users, and we want to get this bug this bug fix into a CAPI release where we will then pair it with some CAPZ specific fixes also and make sure things look great and get these into hands of customers as soon as possible. So does anyone have any context that could be helpful towards pushing back on this notion? Is there a reason not to cut a 1.2.1 of CAPI, say, in the next week?
I guess my only concern here would be is that I think at the moment Fabrizio is out, and I would want to just make sure we get some opinions from some of the other project.
For sure, no, that's it.
Yeah.
All the maintainers who can cut the release in a practical way being out of, and that's a good reason to stop things.
It looks like Fabrizio did cherry pick it to the release branch 16 days ago. So
yeah, for sure. So for sure. So I think the release branch is healthy and ready to go. It's just a matter of putting sprinkles on top of the whipped cream.
And I see Cecile is patiently waiting with her hand up here. So go ahead.
Thanks. So we are working on a release V team, but that's not quite ready yet. We're still working on the process. That's actually my next item in the agenda. So in the meantime, there isn't really a process. It's more like, I think we've talked about doing a patch release like every month, but I don't know if we've really talked about doing like a emergency patch release. It's like there's a important bug that we want to fix. I think it's more of a matter of like finding a maintainer or someone who has like the time to take care of it. I would be happy to volunteer, but also this is my PR, so I don't want to. I think we should get at least one other maintainer to sign up on this. I don't know, Vince, I see you're here. Sorry to like put you on the spot, but would this be something that, like, do you have any objections if we were to cut a patch like sometime this week?
No, I think we should probably be good to go. Is there anything else that we should back for? I saw like a bunch of things like emerged today, but
Yeah, I think a lot of things have backported already and haven't been released because we haven't done a 1.2.1 yet, right? So everything that's been cherry picked on top of 1.2.0 is still waiting to be released.
Yeah, there is actually only one PR out, which is a doc thing that I'm gonna prove now. But yeah, is anybody volunteering to do the release? I don't think I will have time this week. But
Yeah, I can help with the actual cutting. Jack, if you want to pair on it, maybe you and I can go and do it together, and I can use my maintainer powers to approve things.
Yeah, I can definitely happy to help if the conflict of interest thing is acceptable to everybody. And you know, I think this is a great conversation. If we don't have a resilient way to do an emergency patch release, then I'll take notes and offer some observations about what gaps we need to make that, you know, easier for us in the future. I assume that is a North Star for most of us, is to make this process easier.
Yeah, we could definitely take that into the release discussion, the release process discussion. And then in terms of like checking for other backports, I think we can start by, before cutting the release, maybe doing just an audit of the PRQ right now and seeing if anything is like on the like waiting to be merged, to be backported, and just take it from there. How does that sound?
Super great. Is there a general understanding that bug fixes are the only allowed patches in a patch release? Cool.
I would expect so, but you know, this is probably something that our release team is going to like, you know, put into documentation and whatnot, right? I mean, overall, what y'all are talking about, it sounds like a good plan to me. And you know, I'm +1 for doing the release as well. I think it's really cool, Jack, you offering to pair up with Cecile and do it, because yeah, like it'll be good to share some of that responsibility, and also yeah, get a good first look on what does it take for new eyes to kind of like go through that process and whatnot. So that sounds cool to me, and I guess seems like we have agreement here, so probably best to move forward on that.
Cool. Thanks, Cecile.
All right, cool. Anything else on that topic before we move on? Okay, and it kind of runs into the next one here. So Cecile, why don't you take it away?
Thanks. Yeah, so I mean, this is super relevant, I guess, now, based on this last conversation. But so we kind of, so Lori started this doc and I added to it to start talking about what we want to do in terms of having a CAPI release team that can help with the basically the planning and organizing and then chores of cutting releases, and got some good comments and feedback. And I think we're kind of going towards a general direction and starting to agree on a foundation for now, and trying to keep it small at first so that it's easier to implement, and then maybe growing it later in terms of responsibilities. I guess I was just wondering what people see as the next step for this. Would it help if I open a proposal in CAPI with the formal proposal of the process? Should we just try it out for 1.3 first so we can gather some feedback on the ground of what works and what doesn't work? I'm kind of open to suggestions here. I haven't had as much time to look at this week, but comments have kind of slowed down at this point. So I'm hoping we can move forward and take something out of this.
Well, I know my opinion on this. I think it would be cool to get a proposal going and also do the other, like do both things, like start a proposal so we could get like some of this recorded and whatnot, and like move it out of the Google Doc into like something that we might be merging into our repo, and also to get the discussion going there. But I think at the same time, it would be cool to do the release so that we could report back, you know, as it's happening. And I'm just I see some movement in the chat here, so I'm gonna just take a look to, oh, this is about the previous topic, sorry, kind of about the end-to-end testing and whatnot. Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, is the outcome of this, I'm sorry, I haven't read this through, is the outcome of this exclusively documentation and sort of community consensus and agreement, or is there also automation that will be desired automation that will need to be implemented as a part of this.
I guess I'll answer that. That's a good question. There is no like immediate implementation that needs to be done for this. It's more like consensus building and agreeing on a process. Part of the process that what we talked about is having also the release team, I think it's at the top somewhere, but having the release team also be responsible for improving the automation improve tooling, documentation, and automation of the CAPI release process. So that would be part of the responsibilities. We already have some existing automation, but we can always do more to improve things. And so the hope is that whoever is, volunteer for a certain release cycle would also leave the process in a better place than they found it. So, continuous improvement and always like trying to make the automation better. But there is no like work that needs to be done before this can happen, if that's your question.
Yeah, cool. So I think I would, to the extent that there's stuff in here that involves things like define roles and terms, someone is a release manager for say 3 months or whatever. To the extent that that's in there and that there are at least high level descriptions of how a release works, I would advocate that we move this into a PR and then we go through the process, we go through the sort of exercise of following the proposal for the next N releases. And after every release, we can refine the proposal and add folks' opinions. And it seems to me that would be a sort of practical way to make this a living proposal and get it closer and closer and closer to consensus. And I would be happy to sign up for one of those roles just as even though it's not defined and we haven't agreed upon it, just to act out that role as a prototype and offer, my observations, and other folks could, from the sidelines, offer their observations about how someone fulfilling that role, how did that actually help benefit the project or the release process.
Does anybody else have thoughts or opinions about this? I see Matt gives a +1 for trying out the release team IRL in chat.
Yeah, and actually, I'll speak to some of the meta questions in chat about provider signal against CAPI releases. If that's not in this proposal, then I'll advocate that be in the proposal. So that is also something that I think will definitely benefit CAPI and all of its provider ecosystem by being a standard part of the release process, having provider signals actually gate the release. So that, because we're actually it'll be easy for us for this patch, if we do a patch release, for us to kind of go through that exercise, because in fact, the thing that I'm the most concerned about is getting sort of pretty definitive signal on a particular thing that has to do with both CAPC and CAPI, and also work with other providers to make sure that the thing that is being moved forward isn't breaking, as we don't expect it to be, but getting that verifiable signal will be super helpful.
So Cecile, I know it's a big ask and everything, but if you're willing to take this forward on and start working on a proposal to the GitHub repo, I think that would be awesome, because it sounds like we've got some kind of complicated questions and just ideas that people want to express. So maybe starting to get it in that format would be like the best for the community, I guess.
Yeah, I can definitely do that and take that to open a PR. I guess what I would need then, if we want to try this out in real life, is form a team of maybe 4 to 5 people who are willing to be very involved for the first iteration, ideally from a mix of companies, and having like a kind of a pilot release B team that we can use to iterate and gather feedback. So I'll do that maybe in Slack or email, try to form a team there. But then, if anyone else is interested, there will be plenty of opportunity to volunteer for the next release cycles as well, once we have a more defined process.
Okay, does that, I mean, does that sound good when I put in the notes there? I want to make sure I'm not like overextending here.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So probably look out in Slack and maybe email if people are interested, or if you know people who are interested in being part of that release team. I know Jack was saying he'd like to help, but we'll need more volunteers, especially for that initial release. So you know, Cecile and Jack could probably start it off, but it would be really cool if we could get a couple more community members to kind of go along with it. Yeah, Cecile, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think just to make this smoother, I think ideally we want people who already have participated in releasing CAPI, just because they have, you know, more background, context, and experience around that before we get, you know, people who are interested in learning about it involved. So ideally, like, I'll work with, you know, maybe Yuvraj, Killian, Stefan, like the people who, Vince, I don't know, the people who are currently doing a lot of the release chores, so I can get their input as well. I think that's probably what we want here at this point.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. And if you're willing to reach out to like Yuvraj and Stefan and whatnot, that's totally awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so it seems like that's pretty much the end of our topics here. There's nothing else on the discussion topics now. I see Mike has raised his hand. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question, and I'm not sure if this fits within this one or whether I should take this question to both of the Kappa and CapZ breakout meetings, but it's around the managed providers for their clusters, managed clusters, about importing existing managed clusters. So kind of importing an AKS cluster or an EKS cluster or things of that nature. Has it been discussed about kind of just the concept of being able to import existing managed clusters? I can understand how it's much more complicated to say, oh, somebody's got a bunch of VMs running, import those into a CAPI process. I understand how that's something to say, oh no, we can't really do that. But with the managed solutions, it seems like that would be something that might be more feasible. And I was just kind of curious what the concept is on you know, from the managed provider perspective, or the managed cluster perspective.
Right. So just to kind of like restate here, the idea is like, you know, have we talked about the notion of being able to import a workload cluster that is already running somewhere into a different management cluster? Is that kind of what you're asking about?
No, so so there's the managed clusters, you know, so the AKS, EKS style managed clusters. Yeah, adoption. Thanks, Jack. Adopting an existing managed control plane into CAPI. And so I wouldn't see adopting, you know, a VM-based cluster, but now with managed control planes, that seems like something that could be adopted. And I just wasn't sure what CAPI's philosophy around that is, as to whether or not, now that managed control planes are becoming more popular, more prevalent, and the adoption of CAPI is becoming more popular, whether or not that's something that we wanted to discuss and become something that is becoming, you know, a thing or not, or is that something that's more of a discussion with each cloud provider's aspect of it?
Yeah, great question, Mike. Thanks for the clarification there. I see Jack has his hand up, so go ahead, Jack.
Okay, no one else is raising their hand. I've already done plenty of talking, but I will happily continue. So I agree with you, Mike, that I share that observation that this is sort of stepwise easier compared to adopting a self-managed cluster for a whole host of reasons. I don't know if anyone else has made that insight and spent the work really trying to sort of like propose how that would work based on the fact that it is a little bit more achievable. So I'm going to share my observations from lots of folks. This is a super hot topic, I think, for a lot of folks for a lot of good reasons, because you know, the easiest explanation is Kubernetes has been around longer than Cluster API, and to the extent that Cluster API is gaining traction, people are like, hey, well, I already have thousands of Kubernetes clusters. How can I not start all over and just keep going and get the cluster API goodness on the gravy train? So Cecile linked to an issue in chat that looks like it's closed. So that suggests that the Azure managed cluster for CapZ at least has been discussed for adoption. Is there anyone on the CAPI side, Vince, do you have any thoughts on the tractability of this within the sort of limited scope of the managed cluster?
Cecile, why don't you go ahead?
Oh,
And I
go
don't
ahead,
know,
Cecile.
Vince, did you want to respond to that, or?
I've definitely observed that there has been friction. There seems to be an assumption that this is adoption is out of scope for CAPI from a self-managed perspective, but I wonder if that's open to revisitation in the managed scenario. Go ahead, Cecile.
Yeah, I think for managed clusters, it would be mostly up to the infrastructure providers to be, and I think the tricky part here is always like describing something that already exists in a way that you're not going to end up modifying the existing infra, especially if you want to adopt it in the sense of you're going to now own it. And in the past, we've tried to make it very, like have a very clear boundary between things that cluster API can touch versus not touch. So like everything that cluster API creates, it owns and it can delete. Everything that it doesn't create, it doesn't touch. And so now we're kind of breaking that boundary by saying something you didn't create, you can now manage and delete and edit. And so that's kind of a dangerous operation because that means you can potentially end up breaking existing infrastructure. But I think for managed clusters, yeah, it would be like mostly up to each infrastructure provider. And it's something that's come up in CapZ before. I know it's come up in Kappa as well. I don't have the link to the specific issue, but I know that's something that's been discussed there. It's definitely something people have asked for. I don't think there's any like CAPI, like there's much like CAPI like stakes here. Like nothing is like CAPI. Nothing is going to need to be changed in CAPI for this to work. It's mostly about having like infrastructure adopted from the infra provider side.
Yeah, I kind of, maybe I can offer a contrary thought on that, because it sounds like we could put ourselves in a position where one provider has sort of significant feature value over another, which is not something I think we don't want to encourage various providers to compete against each other in that way, I don't think, in this community. But maybe I'm being too sensitive to that, because I can just imagine if it's up to the provider, it's a non-trivial amount of work. And so let's say, you know, CapZ decides to invest in that work. I think that puts the cluster API ecosystem in a weird place where something like this, you know, means you have to go to Azure instead of AWS. So it would be better if it could have a sort of CAPI story as opposed to a provider specific story. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, that's kind of why I thought to bring it up here first instead of in the individual provider one. I kind of felt a CAPI story was more appropriate than a cloud provider story, even though the technical implementation would be on a cloud provider specific basis.
All right. Does anyone else have thoughts on this? Or Mike, do you feel like you've got kind of enough to read up on and kind of think about for the next steps here?
So I'd like to know what next steps would be. Is this something that I should write up a proposal in some shape or form? I'm not sure what the process would be with this. I'm happy to write something up, a feature request via Git issue, some sort of proposal format. I don't know what that would be. Let's see, Cecile.
Yeah, Cecile, go ahead.
Yeah, so there is a proposal open right now in CAPI for managed Kubernetes and CAPI trying to standardize managed clusters across cluster API providers. I don't know if any of the authors are in this meeting right now. but if not, it might be a good idea to reach out to them and try to see if that's something they, thought about, because I could definitely see, maybe not like that being in the scope of this particular proposal, but at least being part of the discussion. And maybe being a follow-up to this proposal, at least like building on top of it. I think it's like very, very relevant, since that's kind of what you're trying to do as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't see Winnie on the attendee list. And I don't, does anyone else have, I guess, more familiarity with that proposal they'd like to kind of answer, Mike? Or I guess, Mike, do you want to just kind of check this out, and maybe this would be the place, if there's not enough details here to add some more here.
Yeah, I've read through that proposal. I'll add a comment in there to, for this particular use case, just so that it's been mentioned.
Okay, cool. I mean, if you're familiar with that one, yeah, maybe it's maybe at this point, yeah, we need to maybe identify what are the differences between that one and what you're talking about, and does that need its own proposal, or could it be part of the other one, just by adding a little more there or something? And then just point to the chat here. It says Winnie and Richard or Cecile saying Winnie and Richard are the right folks to talk to. So maybe just try and hook up with them in Slack too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, cool. Yeah, thanks for that question, Mike. That's great. Does anybody else have any other ad hoc questions or last minute items they would like to add to the agenda? All right, I am not seeing any hands raising, so I guess we will take back about 29 minutes of our day. And thank you everyone for coming out today.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thanks, Mike.
hosting.
Have a good
Bye.
one, everyone.
Yep, you too.